Alison, this is a total treat to be Zooming with you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Look, you played the deliciously snobby, and I have to say, super nasty Nellie Oleson on Little House on the Prairie. Step me back and tell me how you got the role, because I believe you're actually up for a couple in that show.
So I went to the initial appointment, what they used to in the olden days called a go-see, where I met producers and they said, well, we're making a show of these books. And I read for the part of Laura, which I knew I was not going to get. I thought, so wrong for this. And then I read for the part of Mary, and I knew there's no way on earth I was doing that. And then they made the pilot. They went, they got Melissa Gilbert, Melissa Swanis. They made the pilot. And then it was time to cast the people to do the show, to do the series. And I get this call, and I thought, well, they already did that. And no, there's more people in it. They're doing the town. So my father and I go, 12. And we get there, and I have no idea, because I haven't read the books. I don't know there is a Nellie Oleson. I have not a clue. And they hand me these pages, and I'm sitting there with my father, and I start reading them. I said, this is not a normal part. And my father says, what do you mean? I said, this girl's she's a total bitch. And my father starts laughing and says, what are you talking about? And he starts cracking up because, well, she is a bitch. And he said, okay, don't read it again. Don't rehearse it. You have to read it exactly like that when you go in. And I said, what? He said, no, don't even look at it. And they put the pages face down. Don't even look at them again. You go in, you read it exactly like that. Just do exactly what you just did. Okay. So I go in, there's Michael Landon and Kent McRae and Ed Friendly, the original producers, and I start reading it, and they start laughing. And it's like the whole first episode, Country Girls, and it's the thing is there's that speech where I do the school essay, my home is the best home in all of Walnut Grove. And they're in hysterics. These three grown men are crying with laughter, and they're elbowing each other in the ribs. And then they said, could you do it again, please? And I said, yes, I'm sorry, what would you like me to change? And they said, nothing, just read the thing about the house again. I was 12. I'd been in a million auditions. I'd never had a reaction like that. So, okay. So I read it again, and they're howling. They wanted to see if it was a fluke because it was so funny. They're like, why is this tiny child so funny? This can't be real. And I was hired on the spot because when I was done, they said, okay, you can go. Went outside, and Paramount Studios was not very far from our apartment at the time. It couldn't have been more than half an hour. By the time we got in the car, drove home, the agent was on the phone. And he's like, no, you're hired. I've already made the deal, signed, sealed, delivered, decided on the money, got the amount of money for you. Your wardrobe fitting is Tuesday. You're going to work. You're done.
Wow.
They had to have, as I walked out of the room, told everyone else to go home. I mean, it was over.
I got to say, too, this is a bit of fabulous trivia to knock the socks off, I guess, even the biggest Nellie superfan. Nellie's hair, for 99% of the show, was a wig.
I'm coming in at 4 o'clock in the morning, and they're doing the whole thing with the curling irons, and it's just like a nightmare. Yeah. It's taking ever to do my hair in the morning. And they finally said, look, this poor child is sleeping in curlers. It's taking us forever to do her hair. So Ziggy the wig maker, he and Larry Germain, who'd done hair on, had been Betty Davis's hairdresser back in the day, and was the hairdresser on Little House. The two of them constructed this wig, like on my head, matched perfectly to my hair. And so then I had this very expensive, very fancy, custom-made wig, which looked amazing and took much less time to put on. And my hair stayed perfect in humidity and everything, except it had giant metal, as wigs do, a giant metal comb, because it had to stay on all day during mudslide around on the ground. So it's a big metal comb right here. And I don't know how many hairpins went in, but it was excruciatingly painful. And it looks great. And it means that going down a hill in a wheelchair, whatever I'm doing, my hair stays perfect. So it's genius. And I would look in the mirror and go, well, it does look really great. I look fabulous. But it's like, ow. And they really are. And so by the end of the day, and the other hairdresser was Gladys, who had worked with Marilyn Monroe and Betty Davis and Joan Crawford. They'd all worked with these were very old. Marilyn Monroe's makeup man, Whitey Schneider, was our makeup man. So we had Marilyn's makeup man and Betty Davis's hairdresser and people who were all these stars. So she'd get this thing off at the end of the day, and she'd give me like a scalp massage. And I was like, am I bleeding? What is that? I mean, there would be little tiny nicks and cuts. It was awful.
Big question, where is the wig now? I mean, it should be in the Smithsonian, perhaps.
I want that wig. I don't know. I believe it went home with one of the hairdresser's families. I met a woman who's a hairdresser, and her hobby is finding famous wigs from movies. And she was actually going on a quest to find it. She said, I have found famous wigs from movies that nobody knew what happened. I'm going to look for your wig. Still haven't found it, but she's looking.
But let's look at the cast. I mean, you know, we're talking really stellar, sturdy people here. Michael Landon, I mean, became a TV icon. We go back to Bonanza, Little House on the Prairie, Highway to Heaven. What was Michael like to work with?
Brilliant, brilliant man. Okay, so he's writing the show, directing the show, producing the show, starring in the show. He's doing everything all at the same time, coming up with these ideas. Even in the middle of a scene, I've changed my mind. I want to do the whole thing this way. And he's just, oh, okay, we're doing it. And he knew what he was doing because he'd come up through Bonanza. And he knew that this generation of women had grown up reading the Laura Ingalls books. And they were a certain age. And they had all fallen in love with Little Joe from Bonanza.
Yes.
So, I'll do Little House on the Prairie and I'll play Pa, and ta-da. So the man was a genius. But he had a marvelously warped sense of humor. He enjoyed practical jokes. Here we were doing this very dramatic show, and you were guaranteed, if it was a crying dramatic scene, that when he got in the right take, that then towards the end, instead of cut, he would say something ridiculous or step into the scene. And I was lying on the ground when I supposedly hit the tree branch and was unconscious. And I was lying on the ground. I've lit fake blood coming out of my nose. I'm unconscious, trying to be unconscious. And I'm waiting for them to say cut. I've been lying there beautifully unconscious while Laura and Mary say, get Doc Baker. And I'm not hearing cut. And I'm waiting and I'm waiting. And finally I feel a finger in my nose. And Michael's decided to stick his finger in my nose so that he has fun outtake footage instead of saying that. And this was like every day. It was constant. He had this high-pitched giggle like a girl. You knew Michael was on the set. He'd be miles away on location. You'd hear, oh, good, he's here. Yes. And
is it right that he did not wear underwear on the show?
I'm stunned by this because the show takes place in the 1800s where people were rather modest and wore like long underwear. But it was shot in the 1970s, and in LA in the 70s, men often wore tight jeans and gold chains, no underwear. And you can watch the show sometimes and go, oh, good heavens. He and the shirt off. Every episode, Pa Ingalls hurt himself, and when he hurt himself, you notice he only ever broke his ribs. He never broke an arm, he never broke a leg. He only broke his ribs, and the shirt would come off, and there'd be an ace bandage pushing everything up to his chin. He knew the women were tuning in. It was like, hi, yes, I'm here. Hello,
you
hi.
Bet.
So
he was a thirst trap. He was a 1970s, 1980s thirst trap.
He knew he was Mr. Eye Candy, Mr. Hot Dude on the Prairie, and worked it. And by God, it worked. The show ran for 9 years. So
you make a revelation in your book. You reveal that Michael Landon also had a slightly wild side, in as much as a wild turkey side.
And Michael drank on set. He'd step into the prop truck. And they said, the usual stuff. He had whiskey in the coffee. And I remember Melissa said, he had vodka when I caught him. I was like, well. And he drank and he smoked. And then they would do this all day. And then at the end of the day, they'd set up a bar with the board on sawhorses and have the real drinking. And then heaven forbid you went to the wrap party, the Christmas party. I mean, that was just, you'd be swimming in it by then. And I don't know how they did it. I do not know how they got through the day and nobody fell asleep or fell over, but they did it. And they cranked that show out, and he was absolutely on it, knew what he was doing.
Alison, his end was really dreadful.
Nowadays, they can do so much more for pancreatic cancer. They catch it much earlier, but he was very far along. And he was someone who was never sick. He was someone who was never going to die. He was going to outlive us all. So when he announced he had cancer, everyone was absolutely thrown. We were just complete shock. Like, how this is impossible. That is impossible. And then to see, yes, Mr. Tan, healthy, become so thin and so frail. And then in the middle of it, what does he do? He goes on the Tonight Show with Johnny Carson and does essentially a stand-up routine and tells jokes about being sick, and has Johnny Carson in stitches.
An incredible man, that's for sure, and an amazing legacy. A couple of words on Melissa Gilbert, because obviously you worked so closely together.
Here we're playing mortal enemies, and we became such good friends. We'd beat each other up all week and have slumber parties at each other's house. It was bizarre.
What about Melissa Sue Anderson, who of course was Mary, another role that you were up for?
When you read Laura's book, she even talks about that Mary was so good, even Laura was jealous and couldn't stand it. So she's playing this perfect girl, and then she has to go blind. Do you know every bad thing in the world happened to Mary?
I do. Shocking.
Right? The pressure on child stars to be perfect is quite heavy. Well, her mother was quite protective, and apparently her mother told her not to talk to me or Melissa Gilbert. I think we were considered a bad influence. One party, there was one party where she actually came, and we all went to an amusement park, and she seemed to have a good time. But the rest of the time, it was me and Melissa going, has she spoken to you yet today? No, not at all. And she would just look at us like we were criminals and, and wanted nothing to do with us. And as an adult, yeah, she may have had a point, but she was not having anything to do with the likes of us. It was very clear. And I mean, I don't know. I guess if I'd had to play the blind girl and had the team of managers and agents and stage mothers ordering me about like that, maybe I would have been awful too.
That's true. Leo Penn, of course, Sean's incredibly talented dad, he directed many episodes of Little House on the Prairie, of course. But what maybe not a lot of people know is that Sean, at 14, also made an appearance. Do you remember that occasion?
Never forget it, because Sean Penn saved my job. Yes, this is one of those this is a very crazy Hollywood story. So it was the fabulous episode, The Voice of Tinker Jones. Sean Penn isn't anyone yet. He has done zero, nothing. No one knew who was Sean Penn. He's just the tall, gangly, blonde boy standing next to Tinker Jones. So we're shooting the scene. Now, right before that, I had fainted after that because it was over 100 degrees in Simi Valley where we filmed the show, and I was wearing petticoats and a wig and a thing, bonnet. It was horrible, and it was really hot. So I would faint from time to time. They'd revive me. I'd go right back to work. They'd like wake up, back to work. But they started to wonder if maybe I was frail or I was malingering or something. And then this big, tall, big blonde teenage boy is standing there, and suddenly his eyes just sort of roll up into his head, and his legs, he's just like a sack of potatoes. Down, down. He didn't say boo. He didn't say I don't feel it. He was just out. It was like, oh, where'd he go? So after that, they said, wow, he passed out. Maybe it's not just her. Maybe she's not imagining things. Maybe it's really this hot. So 100 years later, I'm in my 20s, and my boyfriend at the time he was working at a theater and had gone to this party afterwards, which apparently involved Sean Penn and a bunch of people. Well, he doesn't come home. It's terrible. So it's 2 a.m. and I still haven't heard from the boyfriend. And I'm like, well, this is getting ridiculous. And my phone rings. I go, well, it's about time. And I pick up the phone, and it's Sean Penn, who I haven't spoken to since 1975. I said, well, hello. And he says, well, why aren't you here? And I go, why aren't I where? And he said, oh, well, we're having this after party. It's at my house. And your boyfriend left and said he was going to go pick you up and bring you over here. And I've been waiting, and we're all here. And he said he was going to come go get you. And I said, well, I haven't heard from him either. I hope nothing's happened. And he said, but he said he was picking you up. And I said, wow, that's really weird. We met once. And he said, yes, Little House on the Prairie, when we did that episode. And I said, yeah, and it was really hot. He said, yeah, I know. And I passed right out. It was awful. And I said, and I told him what happened. He said, oh, well, you're welcome. So Sean Penn saved my job, and I was able to thank him.
Let's go back to the beginning, because your mum and dad were both in showbiz.
But yes, my mother, my parents met in the theater in Canada.
Yes.
They, in Vancouver, my father founded the Totem Theater. And then they were in radio, and then they went to New York. Then my mother became the queen of voiceover. Davy and Goliath. My mother was the voice of Davy.
Yes.
She was the voice of Casper. She was the voice of Gumby. And she was Sweet Polly, purebred underdog's girlfriend.
And I know your dad, you referenced him being one of Hollywood's top agents.
He wound up working for Seymour Heller and Associates in the big 9,000 building on Sunset, and was assigned to Liberace. Liberace was fabulous. We actually rented a house around the corner for him, like in case he needed something. Close enough. On Halloween, when you went trick-or-treating, all the children in the neighborhood said, well, we have to go to Liberace's house, because you can't mess up Liberace's house on Halloween. So he would usually be off at some party, but he had the butler. The butler would bring a giant silver tray, trick-or-treating. There's the butler with a silver tray with these fabulous little plastic pumpkins, little orange and black pumpkins with these marvelous, very high-end jelly beans, very like gourmet black and orange jelly beans. But you always stopped at Liberace's house. And they would take me to his shows. I was 8 years old, and I'd go see Liberace live. And I was in stitches because I couldn't believe adults were watching this show. Seriously, this man is like he's flying over the stage and driving the limo onto the set and coming on this fur coats and flying around the room, and his jacket lit up. And I'm like, this show is for adults, right? These are grown people watching this. this spectacle. Of course, my parents said, no, don't say anything. That'd be good because no one knows that Liberace is gay. And I said, I'm sorry, I'm 8 years old and I know he's gay. I said, how do you not know? And they said, no, it's fair. But those women, they loved him and they didn't care. They knew. I would eavesdrop on them and I would hear them saying things like, he's that way, you know. You'd be. It was amazing, but everyone adored him and he was marvelous. Everyone who ever worked with him has stories. It's like Elvis. It's like, and then he gave me a car and then there was like shirt off his back. Yeah. And he was very good to everyone he worked with. And my father loved working for him. And I met him many, many times as a child, and he was delightful.
Your family life, your mum and dad, they kind of lived in this modern family situation too, didn't they, really? Which I know you have revealed in your book.
My parents were married in the 50s when things were very sort of, formal, and wives were to be wives and husbands were to be husbands, and everyone was very straight and proper and straightless, and they hit it off, even though he was gay.
That's it.
So, and it was out, and normally you hear about these marriages, oh, the wife does it. No, they did. And my father once said, well, your mother just made me an offer I couldn't refuse. The deal was, she knew that when they discussed it, she would never pick up a pot or a pan or a broom. She wouldn't have to cook or clean. She could continue her career. She could write. She could actually do whatever the heck she wanted. And he would do whatever the heck he wanted. And the two of them lived happily ever after till death did them part some 40 odd years later. It confused everyone, but the two of them had worked it out and they were happy with it.
And Confessions of a Prairie Bitch. I'm not being insulting. This was the title of your 2010 memoir. I was fascinated to read that Little House on the Prairie for you, aside from, of course, being a fabulous job and one in which you had much fun, but it was also a saviour in many respects because you write about having been the victim of sexual abuse from when you were young until that day you got that job.
When I was a little girl, I was physically and emotionally and sexually abused for years, as is usually the case, because when it's in the household, it's not discovered right away. You're stuck with the person. I mean, the majority of children who are abused, who are sexually molested, it's rarely a stranger. It's someone they know. It's the priest, it's the swim coach, it's the teacher, it's the father, it's the uncle, it's the brother. That's who it is.
And in your case, it was your brother.
Yeah. And also remember, this was at a time there weren't PSAs on the television and the radio, and there weren't brochures, and there weren't people going on talk shows talking about being abused and who to call and here's a number. None of that stuff was invented yet. So nobody talked about anything. So I endured, and then I never knew who knew and what was going to happen next. And then I get on this show and everyone is so kind and so supportive and so pleasant. And I'm playing this character that keeps releasing her anger. I'm yelling, I'm screaming, I'm throwing things. And I have to admit, I mean, one of the problems for people who've been sexually abused is you wind up carrying a lot of anger, a lot of rage. Where do you put it? Here I am playing this character who just lets it all out. And I thought, well, this is very therapeutic. I'm throwing vases across the room, screaming at the top of my lungs. This feels pretty good. I feel like getting this all out of my system.
And your brother, as it turns out, Stefan Arngrim, he went on to become an actor of quite some note, Land of the Giants, things like that. Did you guys ever talk about it afterwards? I mean, how did you deal with something like that?
Anyone who's been in a family where this happened will tell you the same thing. Everyone sort of ignores it and tries to pretend it didn't happen for several years. Sometimes the person who's doing the perpetrator will try to pretend it didn't happen and make nice. Or sometimes they'll try to say, well, I'm not like that anymore. So you try to carry on, but it never really works because they don't change. But the years of therapy and growing up and being around really nice, supportive people in my life, and I have a wonderful husband and wonderful friends. It's very, very different now. It's sure different now than when I was a teenager or kid. And when I think of how I feel now and how I used to feel every day in my 20s, it's like, I wouldn't go back to my 20s for $1 million. This is so much better.
What back in the day, Alison, was the fan reaction like
People had more trouble, I think, separating fantasy and reality then than they do now.
Yes.
Nowadays, people are, even the average person is more sophisticated. They know how TV shows are made. They see the actors on talk shows and on Twitter and on Instagram and Facebook. So they go, oh, yes, they're playing. You have less people who think it's absolutely real. But in the 1970s, you didn't have any of that. You didn't have social media. So people thought that what they saw was what they got. And I had someone throw a cup of orange soda at my head during the Christmas parade. A direct hit, too. And I was moving. They had really good aim. And I had two little girls kick me and knock me down at a fair where
What?
I made the fatal mistake of going in costume. Someone said, we want to have Nellie and Mrs. Oleson in costume. And they knew someone at the network, so they got us all dressed up. My father said, this is a terrible idea.
Yeah.
And yes, I got attacked. People thought it was real. They got really into it. It's a little better now, but I admit, my husband, people say, oh, you're married to the woman who's Nellie Oleson. What's that like? And so there's still this idea that I might kind of be terrible and frightening.
It is one of the curiosities of life that Little House on the Prairie to this day remains almost an icon in France, correct?
Often a 70s show doesn't get to Europe till, say, the 80s.
Yeah.
No, it's like by 76, 77, they were running it. They had, I think, 2 channels at the time, and they ran it at lunchtime. So I show up, and they went bananas. I go on a talk show. They were singing the theme song. There are no words to the theme song. I walked out on stage, and everyone went, la, 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 la. And the French were so obsessed. If 3 or more French people are walking in the park, and there's a little field with flowers, one of them will say, I am baby Carrie, and fall down. They're obsessed. They have an expression. There's an expression. Like, you're working hard, chopping wood. Oh, coupe de bois comme Charles Ingalls. I've been chopping wood like Charles Ingalls. This is a thing people say in everyday speech. They are obsessed with Little House on the Prairie, and they love Nellie Oleson. They think Nellie Oleson is the funniest thing that ever happened. She seems very nice to me. I don't know. They don't think I'm mean. They think I'm French. So they adore Nellie Oleson and Mrs. Oleson. They adore Little House on the Prairie. Can't get enough. So for the last several years, I've been going there and doing a show, a whole stage review with this guy, Patrick, and we do things with clips and sketches, all in French. And they go, it's sold out, people hanging from the rafters, and it's all done in French, and they love it. They can't get enough.
And I suppose just to underscore the impact that Little House on the Prairie has on so many people, you are sitting on a fabulous work of art, courtesy of a Little House on the Prairie fan.
Yes, she made this. She makes quilts and things, and she was watching my Facebook readings, and she said, do you want a quilt? And sent this. So I put it over my chair, and I've been using it because it's so gorgeous. It's cats. It's little shapes of cats.
Wow. Tell me about the Alison Arngrim in 2021. Any fabulous projects on the brew that you can talk about?
I wanted to do my stand-up act, and I thought, well, I can't go to the clubs. I can't go to New York. It's canceled. And then I get a call. Well, we're trying out this platform. It's called stageit.com, and various comedians using it. Next thing I know, I got a backdrop hanging in the living room. We set up the computer, and I do my stand-up show live streaming pay-per-view. I did a movie in September. I actually went to Utah, and it's called Even in Dreams. And it's about a girl in the music industry, and I play the evil, manipulative band manager, and I'm so awful. I do Cameo, that thing Cameo where you do, hi, now, listener, happy birthday. Also, I'm starting a cooking thing. I've been working on a cookbook.
Yes.
Because, Nellie couldn't cook. I can cook, but Nellie couldn't cook. So it's called Who's Going to Do the Cooking? And it's for people who can't cook. People who cook as badly as Nellie Oleson can read this book.
Alison, this has been not just a thrill, a total treat and utter joy. It's lovely to have been Zooming with you.
Thank you so much. It's been lovely. Thank you very much.